There's so much wisdom that's in our bodies. It always knows this next step, even though we can't explain it.
Be balanced, be an entrepreneur, be a friend, be a lover, be there for all aspects of your life.
It's so helpful to have other people and other eyes on your life and to be sharpening and step into that and actually create that for yourself.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. My name is Ethan Schultz. I am your host of the TRU-U podcast. Here at TRU-U, we have conversations with people living their best lives in hopes that you will gain value. Enjoy. This episode is brought to you by Good Buds Co. Good Buds is a Southeast Minnesota leading cannabis brand that is actively inspiring people to grow their belief in the benefits of the plant while creating a vision for better health, economic change, and community awareness. Their scientifically proven products have gotten raving reviews and are an absolute top choice to boost your overall wellness with a natural solution. And as a social business, Good Buds prides itself in being a give-first company. After all, we could use a good bud. Find them at www.goodbudsmn.com, and for a 10% discount on your next purchase, enter in TRU-U, all lowercase, and enter that in the coupon code space upon checkout. Also, be sure to follow them on Instagram and Facebook by searching Good Buds MN. Welcome. We are now live on the 51st episode of the TRU-U podcast. Today we have a wonderful special guest, Johan
Martinez-Khalilian, you got it.
All right. And to read your lovely bio off here for folks, Johan is...
Wait, you don't have it? You don't have it memorized?
I don't have it memorized.
Come on, man.
Maybe after the third or fourth visit. It's a lot to memorize.
Yeah.
Johan is an internationally recognized motivational speaker and executive coach who has a passion for crafting culture and guiding people towards achieving the impossible. He is a graduate of Northeastern Illinois University with a degree in communications. His message of perseverance and resilience has fostered the interest of a number of TV and radio shows, including the Tyra Banks Show, TEDx, and the Today Show. He's a product of Humboldt Park, Chicago, Midwest guy. Yeah. And he uses his Midwest sensibilities with a love of creativity and meaningful conversations. Everyone has a heroic journey to forge, and Johan would love to serve you as chase the life of your dreams. That's a top 5 bio I think I read off there, my man. That's dope. Top 5, baby.
Made the list.
I think we could talk for 45 minutes on your bio, bro.
There's a lot of different elements. Let's do it.
I'm also a Midwest transplant. I moved to California. You're in California now, aren't you?
I am, yeah. So I was in LA for a little over 11 years. Then I got married and moved to Encinitas, California. That's in San Diego County.
Was it her that dragged you out here?
Well, she invited me. She didn't drag me. You know, I love her words, right? No dragging happening. The invitation was there.
Good.
But yeah, so part of the vision is to have a spot in LA too.
Yeah.
Because I love me some Los Angeles.
Yeah, it's out here. It's just people live a different life. It's like they're just moving quick and so open and innovative and free flowing. I love it. Mm-hmm. I want to know about your story, and we'll play with that, see where that takes us. I love the Chicago grow up Midwest. I'm from Minneapolis area, Minnesota.
Yeah, Minnesota, right? I remember that.
Yeah, man. Bears suck.
Bears, oh yeah.
Just kidding, man.
It's true though. I'm not fighting you. Right? The Bears have sucked for a long time.
But the Bulls in the 90s, man. You haven't seen The Last Dance? Check that out. That was it. I love what you did. Yeah. You can't
Chicago Bulls. Now the Bulls in the 2000s, at least the latter part of the 2000s.
No, yeah.
Kind of like the Bears.
Yeah. Well, the Timberwolves are barely a team, so we'll leave it.
Yeah, but you guys got some great players.
We got hope.
Yeah.
We have hope.
Karl Anthony Towns, Anthony Edwards. Yep.
I'm a Lakers fan though, so that's all right.
Wait a minute.
Yeah. I bleed purple and yellow, man. The Vikings and the Lakers. So, but yeah. So I went
into a sports podcast. Up front. They were like, "Is this a sports podcast or what is this?"
I want to hear about like when you came up in Chicago, what inspired you to get into because you came from a speaking background. Now you're an executive coach. I think that was the chain of events that led into coaching for you. I want to hear about, what inspired that speaking spark in you and a little bit of that story that's led you to where you're at now.
Yeah. Well, I don't know how open to faith conversations are you on the
I'm
podcast, or
open to
is it just anything goes?
You can swear if
Well,
you want, everything.
I'll just swear in the midst of a faith conversation. I'll be like, wait a minute, you
Yeah.
can't be a person of faith if you're cussing.
Yeah.
But so essentially, I became a Christian when I was 20 years old, and up until that point, I wanted to be ESPN broadcaster. And when I, experienced God for the first time, and for me, it was really a supernatural experience. Part of what I love about being a coach actually is inviting people into an outlandish vision for their life. Something that they're like, wow, how in the world would that happen? I think that's part of the moment I started to follow God. That's what God invited me into, and so I've been dreaming in this way for a long time. I've had this imagination for the type of life that I could live, the type of impact that I could make. And what I heard almost crystal clear audibly when I was, 20 years old was, I'm going to use your voice. And at the time, I didn't know exactly what that meant, where that would take me. I just knew I needed to speak about something. So I just started to ask people everywhere. It's like, hey, where can I talk? Where can I speak? Where can I, share my voice? And before you know it, I was speaking in classrooms, and then 4 years of classroom work, really cutting my teeth, learning how to speak, how to develop a story, how to tell jokes, how to read an audience. And then I had, my first opportunity to do something bigger, which was the Tyra Banks Show. That came from an online article that I did, and then my first conference came from that. From my first conference, I had my first speaking tour, and then it just essentially snowballed after that. But it was all rooted in this outlandish idea that, the supernatural force in the world was going to use my voice to create good.
Yeah.
And that's what propelled me forward.
You said that like you make it seem easy. I've spoke not at all like in a fashion of like putting on a seminar or anything, but like in network marketing, I've had opportunities to speak, and I love it. And it's one of the most, I'm an extroverted individual, and for me, it still took a lot of courage to get up there and speak in front of people. I'm interested, like, what was the growth journey like what happened between that article and Tyra Banks, and between all the, like, how much did you have to go through, and what was it like growing the connection to your audience? Like, how did you foster the connection to your audience too?
So because you asked a few questions there, which one you want me to focus on?
So I just threw a lot at you.
Yeah. Which one you want me to go?
Let's go with what were some of the biggest growth curves for you on the speaking? Start with that. Like, it can't be easy.
It's interesting because it's not easy, but at the same time, it felt kind of easy when I was going through it, and I loved it so much, and I was good at it naturally in the beginning, where it almost felt like some of the growth curves I think it was, I was so young that I was just willing to experience anything, So some of the growth curves came from speaking in classrooms to high school kids, where that's not the kindest audience at times, like they can be savage, and learning how to captivate, 15-year-olds, 16-year-olds for 50 minutes at a time was such a great field to play in and grow in.
Yeah.
Where if you can do that for an hour, then you can speak anywhere. And essentially that's what I learned how to do. And I love the process of, how can I fit my story into like a 5-minute bit or a 10-minute bit? And what point am I going to make here? So I would always go speak, and then basically afterwards just do some of the self-assessment to be like, what worked, what didn't work. And I've always been a very relational person. So there's been this feeling that I can connect to my audience, like I can read and feel what they feel. I can see their faces. I can know if something's not working and then shift on a dime. So that one of my first, I would say, growth experiences was being a naive guy who believed this thought of like, oh, I'm gonna, my voice is gonna be used in this supernatural way. My first growth experience was, how do I craft something really sharp in 45 minutes? Um, and that took years. I would say to have a home run talk in 45 to 50 minutes, that really did take me like 2 or 3 years, where I felt confident in, I can give this talk anywhere I go and it works.
Yeah.
And so that was one thing. I would say another growth experience for me was I was good at it, and then I started to protect my image. I started to protect how good I was instead of like continually choosing to stretch and grow. And that's part of what we get to do more from a coaching standpoint, is keep inviting people into what is the next level of growth. So for myself, it became an ego-driven thing. As a speaker, you can do it for the applause. It can be about your image and how good you are as a speaker, instead of actually staying connected to serving and wanting to do this for, the bigger purpose. So I think there was a point in there, maybe like after like the TV and the traveling around the world, where I was like, oh man, I can't mess this up. So I would only choose things that I knew I would be really, really good at,
Yeah.
And I realized how dysfunctional that was for me, how unhealthy that was for me from a growth standpoint, and even from the origins of like, oh, God's calling me to do this beautiful thing, where I made it about me instead of the bigger purpose. So I would say that's another portion. Go ahead. Yeah, you got a question?
Oh, I'm just like fascinated by the like, I'm looking at what you're saying, not just in a speaking arena, but in a life and everything that we as humans experience arena, like that, going from that shell, that protection, into that growth and vulnerability space. And like that transition right there just fascinates me. And like what happens in that, that moment.
Yeah.
Space.
One of my favorite, I don't know.
Moment? Or is it like spread out? What do you...
What a moment?
Like going from or is there like an aha, or did you have an aha moment of like, I got to quit protecting myself, I need to step into this vulnerability or the bigger purpose?
Yeah, I would say there was no like one moment. It definitely was a culmination of like, oh man, I'm noticing a pattern. And I think I would like listen to talks and read, and then I just started to sense how small I was playing, because I was just, protecting my image as opposed to stepping into challenges as a speaker. There was a one of my favorite quotes actually comes from Bane, and I think it was what's the third one? The name of the third Batman movie? Because it's not Dark Knight is number 2, right?
That's its own category.
Batman is it Batman Rises? I don't know. So the third Christopher Nolan Batman movie.
Yeah.
Bane basically says to Batman, "Victory has defeated you." Like he's beating Batman down, and he's noticing like Batman's a little bit slower, and he looks at him and he says that, victory has defeated you. And that's kind of the way that I felt, that I was drunk with success to a certain extent, and I had allowed victory to make me complacent instead of choosing the next thing that would stretch me and grow me.
That's pretty humbling.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
That's like, that's interesting, man, because victory, that's like what I feel like we all are seeking. And you're experiencing what, I guess maybe that was your mountaintop. And then what changed for you? What clicked for you? Was there like, I know that Bane story, but was there like so you say the bigger purpose, like, was it like an outwardly thing that like happened for you, or what was that part like?
Yeah, there was nothing. I mean, what changed for me is reevaluating why I was taking certain gigs, specifically choosing to take speaking opportunities that were a risk. Because I think I was doing that early on, where I'm wet behind the ears, I don't know what I'm doing. And then it's like, okay, I'll speak anywhere, I'll do anything, because I just wanted to grow and I wanted to to step into this field that I had no expertise in. But then once I developed some expertise and I was really good and I was getting attention and accolades, I started to protect that. So I almost went back to the original essence of why I was doing what I was doing. I was like, oh, okay, so I'm here as a servant. I'm here to speak. I want to grow. I want to impact people. And so now I'm going to choose speaking opportunities that aren't just about me, but that are about the bigger story and the bigger impact. So that was the biggest shift, is just returning to that original essence for me. And that started to shape. And then, I would say reminding myself of that consistently, because now as a coach, that's part of why I stepped into this field of coaching, because it makes sense for people to be like, oh, you're a speaker and a coach, but they're very different skill sets. So I had to learn that too, is when, sometimes people would sign on with me to coach because they're like, oh, he's going to teach me cool things. He's going to like give me all his insights. And then what I don't have to, but what I get to retrain people on is, this is not about me inspiring you. This is not about me teaching you things. This is about you learning how to create value for yourself. This is about me holding space for the things that you're up to, and how you get in your way, right? And asking powerful questions in that, as opposed to being like, let me just razzle dazzle you with a cool thought.
As it occurs to you, like, what's the different feeling, or how does it impact you being a coach versus being a speaker?
Well, I love, so on one level, as a speaker, you get a really cool hit of being in the moment, telling a story, and seeing people like respond. Yeah. As a coach, you're with people for the long haul, So I always wondered as a speaker, well, I wonder what happens after. Unfortunately enough, I've been in the game long enough where people will write me emails. They'll be like, hey, I listened to your talk 8 years ago, and this is how it affected me. So that's been cool. But as a coach, I'm like with you in the trenches week after week. Yeah. And then I get to actually see the progression and the change. I get to see you accomplish things that you didn't know you could accomplish on your own. Figure out how you're getting in your way, the growth, the insights, coming up with things that don't work, and then, talking about the defeats as well as the victories. Like, that's stuff that I never really got to experience, or I don't get to experience as a speaker. And I love that, the differences there, because it's in the same realm of helping people grow and shift and chase their dreams. It's just different avenues. Yeah. How much of what you spoke on translated into coaching? Was it all the general, like, go live, or what were some of the? Yeah, well, I feel like with the Novus, so you've talked about go live quite a bit on the show. Yeah. Well, there's one episode that's all on that. If people have listened to enough, they'll know. Yeah. Okay, so they know what the go live is. Yeah, because essentially, my bread and butter talk is a talk called The Crazy Ones, and the essence of it is the people who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones that do. So that's definitely embedded in when you talk about go live. Yeah. It's definitely in there. And at Novus, I don't know if you've talked about intuitive fence. So to me, at the core of it, have you talked about intuitive fence on the show at all? Maybe brush on that for the audience quick, if you will. Yeah. So in its simplest form, most of us have created a fence in our life. That fence dictates what we chase and what we don't chase, what we think is possible and what we think is impossible. Mm-hmm. Most of us stay inside the fence. Mm-hmm. We go after the things that we think are doable, achievable, right? Possible for us. And what we love to do as coaches is poke at that fence and start to go after things that you perceive are impossible. Going after things that are outside the fence that you think are beyond your reach. And then it's cool to see people like grab it and be like, oh my gosh, I didn't know I could do this thing. So essentially the talk that I give is a call to action for the people who are constantly thinking outside of the fence, right? The crazy ones in the world, because that's usually what we do, is we call these people crazy because they see and they imagine things that normal folks can't see or imagine, right? That we think are beyond the realm of possibility. Yeah. And then they end up changing the world as a result. It's Elon Musk who is like, I'm going to make an electric car. And now he's, making a Tesla bot. and fill in the blank, Steve Jobs with the iPhone at the time, where it's like nobody had created a phone that was a computer.
Yeah.
The Wright brothers who created flight for the first time, Barack Obama, who's the first African American president. Like, all of these folks had to jump outside of the fence to say, I'm going after this thing that nobody has ever done before, that most people say is impossible. So the Crazy Ones essentially is a call to action for people like that. And I do my best to create the talk in such a compelling way where even if you hadn't considered yourself a crazy one up to that point, you're excited about that possibility in your life. And again, that's what we get to do from a coaching standpoint, because we're constantly inviting people to live that crazy life.
Yeah. Can you touch on the invitation piece quick, or how a conversation would go with maybe a client playing with the possibility of venturing outside of that fence line?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I really love to, you talking about as a coach?
Yeah, as a coach, or I mean, if it ties into the Crazy Ones, like a message to the audience, whatever. Yeah.
I think, and again, to keep it simple, most of us create our future from our past. Right? We look at all the things that worked and didn't work, and then we start to envision or imagine a life based on what has already happened. And what I love that we get to do is say, okay, this is how we're going to blow it out the water. Let's imagine a future that's only based on your imagination, like your dream. And I love to say that as a coach, I get to create your future from your future, right? Instead of from the past. And that's us playing around with this fence. It's like, yeah, nothing like this has ever happened, but who do you need to be in order to do this thing that you've never done before?
Yeah. Create your future from your future. I haven't heard that one yet. I've played around in this, but I haven't thought that's fascinating. And like, how so then you get like a vision created around that? Like, what happens after you play with the future?
Yeah, I mean, well, the first thing is to get the vision on the board, right? Is to create the measurables. Here's the things that I want. So if for somebody it may be, I've never made six figures in my life, so I want to do that. For sometimes in sandboxes that we're in, which is companies that we work with from a coaching standpoint, sometimes we can work with a manager or leader who's like, what, I'm really good at my own integrity, but I don't know how to help a team follow through with their word consistently. I don't know how to, you know what I mean? Like, I don't know how to get excited about checking in on their word and following up with growth conversations. It's like, that's tedious to me. So that can be for somebody in the realm of impossibility because they've never done it before. So when we start to poke around and say, hey, what would it look like if your whole team was following through with their word 98% of the time, And they're like, man, I would love that. That would totally rock my workspace inside out. And we say, okay, now let's go create. What's your first draft of a plan? What's your strategy to go create that thing? And so that's part of what I love too, because from a coaching standpoint, they'll make commitments and then we'll come back, we'll have a conversation. They'll say, here's how it went. This worked, this didn't work. Yeah. And you get to poke around where sometimes if people create a plan that doesn't work, they're like, you know what, this is never going to work. I don't know why we're doing this. It's like, oh, hold on. Let's stay committed. Let's just stay committed to this thing that you say that you want. It's not going to happen overnight. So let's find an empowered posture so that you keep showing up for that thing.
Yeah, I think that right there, the powerful posture and the the acceptance to be wrong and continue to strive, coupled with the Crazy Ones, coupled with that Steve Jobs mentality.
Right.
And we call that integrity, but there's so much, like, just that persistence factor, man, like that burning desire factor.
And that's why I say, from my origin story, I really think because I believe God has invited me into this type of life, that type of outlandish belief has really fueled me. Yeah. And I think why some of us struggle at times is we don't have anything outlandish that's supporting why we're doing what we're doing. Yeah. Anytime I fell into a trap, I'm like, wait a minute, there's something bigger at play in my life. Like, it's not just about me. And I've been given gifts and talents so that I can serve the world. And that, like I said, that belief, it helps me whenever I'm taking quite a few hits. Or even when we talked about the humility thing earlier, you know, that's why I didn't just make my life about me, where I had a little bit of a dip, but essentially I went back to what's this all about for me?
Yeah.
And that outlandish belief helped me pinpoint my pride and arrogance and then choose humility.
And the verbiage is interesting there, Johan, like outlandish. And then the whole title of your speaking, the crazy ones, it's like, it's interesting how that's a sign of the exact opposite reality. Like, to me, it's like outlandish. That truth you discovered is totally not outlandish, but it occurs to society as being outlandish and crazy, the crazy one.
That's the key, right? That it occurs to the world as crazy. And then for us, we're like, what do you mean? That's normal.
Let's
like, this is the way that I live. You know what I mean? And that's the thing, that's the invitation, is helping people be okay with the fact that it will occur to the world as crazy and outlandish.
Yeah.
But for you, it's just Tuesday, right?
Well, it's like a good indicator of what to run towards almost. Like if we wanted to put a twist on it like that, like if we look at the 10% of people, or, you know, what you focus on grows, like who, you know, if you have a crazy idea, don't look at what 90% of people do with crazy ideas and dump it. Like what do the ones do with it to serve people? Like, how do they create this shit? You know, it's like, it's interesting to think about, like just flipping that. And it's just like, just the catch up, like of technology. You talked about the Wright brothers, Steve Jobs, and all these people, and Barack Obama. And like now we all accept that. All society accepts that. The outlandish does eventually occur to those people as being not outlandish, but it always starts out that way.
Yeah. And I think, you know, what's sad is I believe that most people think the outlandish is reserved to special folks, you know, people who just, they have specific talents and gifts that most people don't have. So that's why they can do those things. And, you know, what I love is most people who achieve the impossible are regular folks. And they'll just talk about like, no, I had a crazy belief that other people wouldn't believe. And then from that belief, I started to take action. I made sacrifices, you know, I worked on my character. And because of that, I kept pushing when other people would give up. I kept moving forward. And that's why I was able to bring this thing to life. And I think that's really the secret sauce, is one, to have an outlandish belief and couple that with the resilience and determination to never give up.
Right. And
that's how you really change the world.
Yeah. It's like the special piece there too is a mindset. I feel like those people chose to be special. It's not like, I mean, they may have had that belief or that idea, but then they fostered that. Like even homeboy, I know Michael, if we did the camera a little bit, it's on your wall back there. I love looking at
Yeah. There he goes. Bam.
He didn't make his high school team right away, did he?
Right. Exactly. He was cut from his high school team. And, you know, so this is, you know, as we have a little sports conversation moment as it relates to that. So, you know, people look at LeBron James versus Michael Jordan, and they're all constantly debating who's the greatest of all time, right? Like, who's the GOAT? Yeah, let's go. That's right.
Let's be real.
You know, Midwest folks, we know who it is. It's Michael Jordan. But, you know, folks legitimately debate this. And what's interesting to me is, you know, LeBron was called the king in high school. And he is pinpointed as one of these special talents physically, but I think he hasn't actually figured out his full potential or lived from his full potential because he was tapped as so great early on. Mike, however, was cut, and his hunger and tenacity came from, okay, I have to earn the thing that I want, where I feel like LeBron was given so much. And that's part of why, you know, he's been to now, I think it's like, 9 or 10 NBA finals, and he's won, what is it, 3?
Yeah.
Four. He's won 4. Because 2 with Miami, and then 1 with the Lakers, and 1 with Cleveland.
If he wouldn't have retired, he'd have had a 7-peat.
Right? Who Michael, right? That's what people say for Michael. But all that to say, right, it's like, I think the special narrative actually does us a disservice when it comes to our hunger and our drive.
Yeah.
Because Michael had to really push and work hard to achieve what he did. And LeBron, I think it was just like, I'm like an athletic beast, and I'm just going to fly off my talents, you know?
If LeBron had what Michael had up here, not saying LeBron doesn't have that mentality.
I think he has it now.
He's got some good shit.
Right.
But if he would have had that Mad Mike mentality,
right,
or that Mamba mentality or whatever we call it in LA with Kobe, like that you just like when you were saying all that, John, I was thinking like, man, when I watched The Last Dance, you can see the E and the go live values in this guy. Like you can see in his eyes. Like you can tell by looking at him. If I showed up on the Bulls court in '96 without even ever watching the guy on TV before, I could tell you by looking at his face that that's the most savage guy out there.
Yeah, he's 100% savage. Well, so that and here's why I think, Michael had the hunger. And what I wish for Michael, because when you see how his teammates talk about him, how his marriage fell apart, what I realize is, yeah, he had that hunger and that drive and that tenacity, but he wasn't building and creating from love.
Yeah.
And I think that, like, to start to think about what would have been possible for him if he would have actually taken the same drive, but coming from the posture of love, as opposed to, I think he was really rooted in anger.
Yeah.
And there was some fear there. There was revenge. He always had to find the narrative of like, how do I stomp on you, instead of a love and a passion for the craft and the game and, all the things that I think are life-giving. I think his life would have been that much more enriching on other levels outside of the court, because he was who he was on the court that we all, love. But I think other areas and relationships and things like that actually suffered. His addictions, all of that was a result of him coming from a place that wasn't really healthy.
That's a really wild catch. Like just that, like understanding of that, like when you encompass the whole go live values, like growth, ownership, love, integrity, vision, and energy, like when they're all there, it's like a well-oiled machine. And like, it's really interesting too, to see, like, even thinking about motivation coming from love or coming from fear, and how much he did based off of fear. And it's like, you got to wonder where, like, if there was like much peace that, like, as I wrestle with that a lot. I think that a lot of what I've experienced has been based out of fear coming up and like making moves. And like, it's just really interesting to sit in that and think about, like, where's the motivation coming from? And like, how can I shift that? How can it be more fulfilling or more serving?
Yep.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Because there's always an area of growth, and that's where we go. We go into the G of the go live. There's always a place to grow. So if we look at Michael Jordan as an example, to be like, wow, when it went in terms of his performance as a basketball player, it's like he reached a really high level. And then if we say, well, where can he grow? Okay, so he can grow here in terms of, well, what's the source of your motivation as an athlete? Well, he can grow in terms of how he's relating to his teammates. Well, he can grow in how he's relating to his family, right? Like, there's always an area of growth. And sometimes we're so blinded by someone's success that we aren't willing to engage growth conversations in other areas for them.
That's powerful. That's a really powerful notice. Like, there's always room for improvement, even in the areas that he was considered the GOAT in. And that's where I think he was so focused on, that he just kept scaling in that area. And that's where, like, I think a lot of like people get caught up excelling and being the masterful in one space, and then they may lose sight of those other values.
Yep. Yeah, there's a story. So they ended up doing a little documentary. I don't know if you've seen it, about Luke Longley. So he was the center for the Bulls in the last three-peat. And so he's an Australian guy, 7-footer, but a lot of people call him like the gentle giant, So he didn't have that hunger and tenacity that Michael Jordan had. So him and Mike had sometimes like a headbutt type of relationship. Sure. And Michael Jordan shares a story in the documentary about him where he's like, so Luke has this game where at the end of the first quarter, he has 14 points, 5 rebounds, and 5 blocks. And he's like, I go up to him afterwards, after that first quarter, I'm like, that's what I'm talking about, Luke. If you play like that, we dominate. Like, we won't lose because you have that in you.
Yeah.
And then he goes, and at the end of the game, Luke had 14 points, 5 rebounds, and 5 blocks. And he's like, he had the exact same stat line. So he's like, I went up to him and I said, you know what, man? That's the last time I'm ever going to encourage you in the midst of a game. And I thought it was really interesting. Like, Michael's takeaway was, see what happens when you're nice to people, or see what happens, right? Like when because we don't know if that was actually what did it for Luke Longley. If he had a little piece of encouragement, he's like, okay, now I'm going to stop trying.
I think it's interesting. Like, and I'm sure you can relate in the coaching space. discovering how everybody receives and how to communicate with every individual, and they're all different. Like Luke was much different than Dennis Rodman. That guy,
Right.
like the way you get him to be showing up is way different.
Right.
It's interesting. Because we all have this one area that we're like maybe lesser than in another area, and it's like, how do we invoke change or inspire? And
yeah, and I think that's the thing, for Mike, that's what everybody says about him. And we don't have to talk about Mike the whole time, even though I love to talk about him.
Cool.
But I think he had a leadership style that did it get results? Yes. Right. So a lot of his teammates were afraid of him, and also they saw the results that he was creating. So it's like there's an air about playing with the greatest of all time.
Yeah.
I think though he could have got the results and something extra, right? Like he could have, right? Like the type of leader he could have been the type of leader who says, okay, how do I lead Luke Longley in a different way than I lead Dennis Rodman, than I lead Scottie Pippen, And if he was able to tap into that versatility, I think the culture of the Bulls, and I also think his burnout wouldn't have been, like, I don't think he would have burned out. I think he would have found this rejuvenating force to keep tapping into, because it's no longer about fear and anger and revenge,
and
but
you got
love. And
the front office did the same thing, and they probably would have went on a 13-peat, man.
Right. Because the culture, and I think those are the things that we don't know how to assess right now. Obviously, I'm not an expert. This is me, speaking from some of the beliefs that I have from a coaching standpoint and looking at what I saw from the documentary. So this is my 2 cents, take it or leave it. But this is something I do believe in. I think he could have accomplished, as crazy as this sounds, he could have accomplished more if he would have found a different source to build and create from.
I see that. I agree with that. I think that's I think right now what's coming up for me is like cultural and tapping into cultures and shifting that entire, like what we're talking about as a whole or as a group conversation rather than an individual. And like the sandbox versus individual client thing. And it's like, really, like, what's your take on like tapping into that space as a collective? Like, I'm sure leadership, it's really goes from like, Michael would have been one, but then the front office in that scenario would have been very important. And like, they're all different, I know, but like it's based on needs and what areas they're strong in and what areas they're not. But it's really interesting looking at an individual shift versus a cultural shift. I think it always starts with an individual, though, or individuals. But.
Yeah, and I think that was part of the culture clash in the Bulls. Was I love that this has become like a little Last Dance talk. But
there's value.
But there, Jerry Krause at the time wanted credit, so he's the GM of the Bulls, right? He's like, I orchestrated this.
Yeah.
Michael Jordan's like, I'm the best player. So it became an ego battle instead of how can we value the culture, create a vision for what we want this culture to be, so that everybody from top to bottom is on the same team. We're going after the same thing. We want to win championships, right? We don't have to do that in a divided way. We don't have to make it about who's really responsible for this. Because what if they all had the mindset that said, hey, when you win, I win.
Yeah.
And they were all giving away credit. Like, what if that was a part of and again, because I think that's a result of love. I think that's a result of abundance, of generosity. And so when you have a culture that's rooted in that, and you can still have the same level of discipline and tenacity, I think what happens is there's a fear that if you start to live in love and generosity and abundance, you're going to lose the hunger and the drive, right? Yeah. Like, I think that's why most people don't do it, because they're like, no, but then we're going to be soft. And then we're just going to be okay when we lose. And it's like, that doesn't have to be true. You can still keep that competitive spirit, and it can exist in this tension. So what does that look like? Not only for the Bulls, but for people like us and for people who are listening, to say, you can love what you do and yourself, and also all the things that we're talking about here can be true too.
And that's what makes coaching, I feel, so powerful, is it really shed light on a lot of those things, because they may not have even realized, really, because they're so in that egoic battle that they don't even notice this stuff.
Right.
And then after you notice it, humbling yourself to even be willing to take action and go towards the bigger vision is another completely Yeah, that's something. Like, there's two hangups right there. If you can get through those two things, then you're really, I think, paving the road. But that was interesting. You said ego. I was like, is that a sign? Like, if you look for where your ego shows up, like, and get curious about that, that could be a discovery phase. Just
100%. I think, you know, to me, this maybe throw you for a loop, and even people that are listening. I look at somebody like Mr. Rogers, right?
all right. Yep. Loop
And
through.
and you look at his drive and his tenacity to achieve and impact, and it was really high. The difference is he was really rooted in love, so much so that he made sure that he weighed 143 pounds his whole life.
Damn.
Right? I love you. 143.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So that's a commitment to being love. So it didn't make him, you know, soft. He didn't achieve less. He actually went after so much. Everybody loved him because of the impact that he made.
Wow.
Right? And he was coming from this fuel source that we know is regenerative, and obviously he did it until he was, you know, pretty old in the game. But that to me is demonstrative of, like, what would a hybrid of Michael Jordan and Mr. Rogers look like? Like, imagine that.
You know what I mean? Looking guy.
Yeah. What if they had a baby? Would he be able to hoop?
Yeah. Well, their mentality. I mean, it's everybody's got that room for growth, though. At the end of the day, that's like the narrative here is like, where do we excel, and where does there need to be weight on the bar? I think curiosity is it, man. Just like it started with your story, you know, coming up with the God-given gift to speak, and how that's translated, and how you realize that there was that shift that you needed to serve instead of being in the shell. And I think that's a testament, just like the Michael story, how we may not know things, or we may take. Yeah, it's just so interesting to think about, and it applies to all of us in every space. We're not quite to landing the plane yet, but we're getting close. So I'd love to hear. Well, I'm sure the audience would love to hear. You're not tough to find. Now, there's some people that gotta be like, where can we find you? But you're easy to find, man.
Yeah.
Where can we go to stalk you? Is there a site? Obviously your IG. Where can we find you?
Yeah, you can go to my IG and Johan Speaks. That's primarily where I spend a lot of my social media time.
Yeah.
So you could see right now it's pretty inundated with my daughter, who's 5 months old. Her name is Isla. So my family's on there, you know, my wife, and then my addiction to sneakers is all over social media, as well as, you know, talks and content that I'm creating for the world. And then, my website, I also have a podcast. It's called From the Future with Love. So that's part of what we're talking about today. Is I wanted to create conversations centered around this idea of, what if people from the future came to give us insights and experiences from 30 years from now, 40 years from now, 50 years from now, and says, okay, here's how we make sure that we create this world that I'm living in the future. For example, one of my favorite episodes is on a future without cancel culture. And instead of cancel culture, there's counsel culture. It's reconciliation culture, you know? And so I have one of my friends who's a professor. Yeah, he's a professor at ASU. And he came on and we talked about, what would it look like to create this world where we don't cancel anybody anymore, because there's space to redeem and reconcile.
Wow, that's powerful. Counsel culture.
Counsel culture, right.
That's dope. That's really dope.
Instead of cancel.
Yeah.
Because I think it's, you know, it's short-sighted what we're experiencing right now, where I understand where it's coming from, which is, hey, we live in a world where sometimes justice never comes, so let's find a way to create that justice. But also, I think we need to create space for people who do want to change and get better. Because right now, all we need to do is cancel, and then that's it. We'll let you figure out whatever. I think if we can start to create room for counsel and reconciliation and changing and forgiveness, I think then we live in a more whole, better world.
100%, man. I like, right when you said 20, 30, 40 years out too, like that reminds me of the intuitive fence. And it's like, where can we go with our mind that we haven't gone before to foster new ideas, or to see what's available? Like, that's really interesting.
Yeah.
the future-based mentality. And it's like, it's interesting, like when you break it down and look at like actionable items or measurable outcomes based on that type of a culture too. But beautiful, man. Well, now we are going to land the plane. So
let's land it.
Yeah. So Johan Speaks, check out all that stuff. And what's From the Future with Love?
From the Future with Love. Yep.
Beautiful. We always end
I would say my website, but nobody visits your website. You know what I
Say
mean?
your website.
Only like a business. Only a business. Yeah. JohanKhalilian.com. So
okay. So check that out too, folks. You got
yeah. Right.
It's just a couple words.
And I'm barely on Twitter, so I don't want to talk about that either.
Oh yeah. Yeah, that's a whole nother topic.
Yeah.
So we always end it with asking, just a broad message, whatever's speaking to you right now for the TRU-U audience, whatever you'd like to leave them with that can have to do with your life or our conversation, whatever.
Yeah. So what's speaking to me is currently our daughter, Isla, is going to have surgery in a couple weeks. And so that's, as you can imagine, that can be pretty stressful. And what I'm learning, and I think what this whole, without giving you guys the whole backstory, is what does it look like to truly be present and release and surrender the things that you can't control in life. There's a lot of power, and I think living in this tension, especially when we want certain outcomes to happen, right? Like I want my daughter to go through surgery and everything to be okay. And I think what I needed to reconcile with is, well, who am I if it doesn't go okay? Now, as much as I don't want that outcome to occur, just sitting in that, like releasing and surrendering to that as a possible outcome, has been pretty powerful for me, instead of avoiding it and thinking that I'd crumble in the midst of that circumstance. Spending a little bit of time in that has actually given me peace. I know that might sound crazy, but being open to all the possibilities that I cannot control, and then living day to day, moment to moment, making the choices that I can and controlling what I can, has been pretty powerful. So that's part of what I would leave your audience with is, what are those areas in your life right now? So, for something like my daughter going through surgery, and who knows what can happen, even though the odds are in her favor.
Yeah.
For some people that could be like, well, that's because that's a surgery situation. But all of us have something right now that we're trying to control that we have no control over.
Yeah.
Right. Because I could try to control the outcome of my daughter's surgery. No matter how hard I try, it's not going to work.
Yeah.
And the same goes for every audience member right now who's listening to this. There is something that you are trying to control and manipulate that you have absolutely no control over. And that's why you're suffering. That's what's creating the stress, the tension, the anxiety. And so what would happen to you if you release that? If you chose to be present, if you chose to ask yourself the question, who am I if things don't work out the way that I want them to? And then live from that place.
That's beautiful, man. And God works in mysterious ways too. That's interesting. And it happens for you. I feel like that's a testament to life happens for you. And we may not know why things happen at that time, but I appreciate you, man. Johan,
thank you, brother.
Speaks, brother.
We did it. We did it.
We did it, man. Thank you so much for joining. You're always a genuine, blessing to just hear speak. And I was thankful to hear you were going to hop on. So we appreciate you, man. And to many more moments, brother. Appreciate you.
That's right. Let's keep coming with the TRU-U.
Hell yeah, brother. All right. Have a great day, Johan.
You too, bro. Peace.